So we've been talking a lot about authenticity in writing this week, a quality the work of our guest speaker tonight, writer Melissa Febos, exemplifies in spades. Febos defines the art of personal writing as the art of revealing oneself, not as we wish to be seen by others, but as we actually are. When beginning to teach the art of creative nonfiction to college students, she points to art critic John Berger's distinction between being nude and naked to illustrate what this means on the page. To be nude, Berger says, is to be seen naked by others and yet not recognized for oneself. To be naked is to be oneself. Febos makes this distinction in her work as a memoirist and essayist. At the age of 26, she published her first book, the critically acclaimed memoir, Whip Smart, a story of the year she spent working as a dominatrix in a New York City dungeon to put herself through college at the New School and to support her addiction at the time to heroin. Febos describes this book as being about all the things no parent ever wants to read about their child, let alone future employers. A book in which she reveals things about herself she never planned to say out loud to anyone, ever. In its review of Whip Smart, the Caracas Review said, "In lesser hands, this could be a maudlin, salacious tale, but Febos's electrifying prose and unremitting honesty continually challenge the reader." Continuing that theme, Slate had this to say in its review. Melissa Febos does not whitewash anything in Whip Smart. It's not just that she writes about, say, spitting and slapping. It's also that Febos has insight into her behavior. Febos continued her exploration and revelation of self in her second book, Abandon Me, a collection of personal essays about the intense bonds of love and the need for connection with family, lovers, and oneself. Abandon Me was a finalist for both the Lambda Literary Award and the Publishing Triangle Award, and considered the best book of 2017 by Esquire, Salon, and The Rumpus, among others. Her third book and second essay collection, Girlhood, will be published by Bloomsbury in 2021. In addition to her books, Febos' work has appeared in numerous publications, including the Kenyon Review, Tin House, Granta, the New York Times, and McSweeney's, to name just a few. Her essays have won prizes from Prairie Schooner, Story Quarterly, the Swanee Review, and the Center for Women Writers at Salem College. Febos is a 3-time MacDowell Colony Fellow and has received fellowships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and the Ragdale Foundation, among others. Febos completed her MFA at Sarah Lawrence College and is currently an associate professor at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. Please join me in extending the warmest of welcomes to Melissa Febos.
Thank you so much, Aggie. That was really generous and so uncomfortable. It's like I've listened to my own bio read so many times and I'm still like a slug under a magnifying glass every time. But I appreciate that. I'm so glad to be here with you all. Something I was just thinking about as Aggie was talking was about how weirdly more intimate it is to give readings on Zoom. It's both sort of like more distant because you can't really hear anyone, but that also creates this weird kind of privacy, like we're all being silent in a room together and it's a room in my home. And so it feels a little bit like saying really personal things alone, which is a different kind of intimacy. It takes away some of the performativeness of performing. So it actually feels a little more personal to me. Okay, so I think I'm going to read a little bit from my new book, Girlhood, which is coming out on March 30th, which seemed like an eternity away for a long time, and now is starting to feel weirdly close, even though it's still a really long time from now. And what do I want to say? I don't know. I'm going to read the more serious thing first. And it's an excerpt, but I don't think it requires any contextualization. But I want to thank everybody in the program, especially Anne, who has been a wonderful mentor and pal to me over the years, and from whom I learned a lot about teaching. Yeah, and all of you for being here. So I apologize. I also live on a very busy road. So I'm wearing my headphones, but there might still be some ambient noise like garbage trucks or sirens or screaming. So, you know, forgive that if it does happen. So, okay, this is from an essay called Thesmophoria, which is in the new book, and it also appeared in the Sewanee Review. My birthday falls during the 4th month of the ancient Greek calendar. It is the month of Persephone's abduction, the month Demeter's despair laid all the earth to waste, and during which the women of Athens celebrated Thesmophoria. The rites of this 3-day fertility festival were kept secret from men. They included the burying of sacrifices and the retrieval of the previous year's oblations, often the bodies of slain pigs whose remains were offered on altars to the goddesses and then scattered in the fields with the year's seeds. When I got my first period at 13, my mother wanted to have a party. Just small, all women, she said. We want to celebrate you. It was already too late. I seethed with something greater than the advent of my own fertility, the hormones catapulting through my body, the cataclysm of orgasms I gave myself each night before sleep, the fact of our severed family, or the end of my child form. I'd been taught by my mother to honor these changes, but there were things for which she neither had nor could have prepared me. The sum of it all was unspeakable. It is so painful to be loved sometimes, intolerable even. Psychologists and philosophers have numerous explanations for the anger that attends this cleaving between parents and children. I've read about separation and differentiation and individuation. It is a most ordinary disruption, necessarily awful, sometimes severe, especially for mothers and daughters. The closer the mother and daughter are, the more violent the daughter's effort to disentangle herself can be. I'm not looking for permission or assurance that ours was a normal break, rather a different kind of understanding. And for that, I need to retell our story. Cape Cod, April. I was 13 and had spent that Saturday at the library with Tracy. At least that was what I had told my mother when I got in her car that evening. The sun was half sunk behind a cluster of storefronts. The afternoon's warmth had turned cool. A breeze from the nearby harbor carrying the soft clang of a buoy's bell. I buckled my seatbelt and waved goodbye to Tracy, who turned to walk home. My mother and I watched her stiff, straight-backed gait, the edge of her t-shirt rippling in the wind. She did walk a little bit like a robot, as Josh had observed when she left us in his room together just before he began fumbling under my clothes. "You smell like sex," my mother said. Her tone was one of exhaustion. "Please," it said, "just tell me the truth. I know it already." It was easy to present the shock of my humiliation as incredulity. I'd done so before, and we both knew it. "I've never had sex," I said, and I believed this. My mother shifted into gear and turned toward the exit. "Sex isn't just intercourse, Melissa," she said. We drove home in silence. How many times could she call me a liar or believe me to be one? I was relentless in my refusal to acknowledge what we both knew. I slept over at friends' homes where older brothers coaxed me into closets or found me in the kitchen at midnight drinking a glass of water. I went on drug deliveries with a friend's mother who sold them, snuck boys into our home or met them behind the movie theater. Grown men had groped me in backyards and basements, on docks and in doorways, and there was nothing my mother could do to protect me. It must have felt like an abduction to my mother, as if someone had stolen her daughter and replaced her with a Maenad. I chose to leave her, to lie, to rush to places where men might lay their hands on me, but I was still a child. Who then was my abductor? Can we call it Hades? The desire that filled me like smoke, that chased everything else out? I was frightened, yes, but I went willingly. Maybe that was the scariest part. In Eros the Bittersweet, Anne Carson explores the term poikilos nomos, given in Plato's Symposium to describe a contradictory ethic in which upper-class men were encouraged to fall in love with beautiful boys who spurned their pursuit. While nomos means law or convention, poikilos is an adjective applicable to anything variegated, complex, or shifting. Carson tells us that this erotic code is a social expression of the division within a lover's heart. A convention of Spartan weddings widely adopted across Greece was for a groom to seize his writhing bride across his body and abduct her by chariot in a seemingly perfect simulacrum of Persephone's rape. The Athenian nomos is poikilos, writes Carson, in that it recommends an ambivalent code of behavior. But the nomos is also poikilos in that it applies to a phenomenon whose essence and loveliness is in its ambivalence. We all know the allure of a reluctant lover, but what of our own divided hearts? My ambivalence tormented and compelled me. That eros was an engine that hummed in me, propelled me away from our home and into the darkness. I knew it was dangerous. I couldn't tell the difference between my fear and desire. Both thrilled my body, itself already a stranger. There was a nomos for this. Daughters were supposed to leave their mothers, to grope for the shapes of men and then resist them. My mother must have anticipated this, must have hoped she would be spared. And wasn't my mother also my beloved, my captor? If Eros is lack, then it existed between us. Wasn't it her arms that I fought against most viciously? Like the Spartan bride, I would have lost my heart if she had truly let me go. A daughter is wedded to her mother first. Zeus insisted Hades return Persephone to her mother, and the Dark Lord capitulated on one condition. If Persephone tasted any food of the underworld, she would be consigned to return to Hades for half of every year. Did Persephone know? Yes and no. In some versions, she thinks she's smart enough to evade him, to taste and still go home. There are so many holes in myth, so many versions and mutations, most unstamped by chronology. A myth is the memory of a story passed through time. Like any memory, it changes, sometimes by will or necessity or forgetting or even for aesthetic purpose. The pomegranate seeds were so lovely, like rubies, and so sweet. In every version of the myth, she tastes them. It was winter in Boston and I was 17. I didn't start with heroin. I started with meth, though we called it crystal, which sounded much prettier than the burnt clumps of tinfoil that littered our apartment and whose singed smell hung in the air as if an oven had been left on too long. Imagine Persephone's first season in hell. When I phoned home, I apologized to my mother for not calling. I've been so busy with classes. I said, I'm making such nice friends. These were half-truths. I wasn't missing classes and I did make friends. I had a job and homework and a bedroom without a door that cost me $150 per month in rent. My mother would have helped pay for more, but with it, she would also have bought more claim on the truth. When I rode that same Greyhound bus home and ate the meals she made and slept in my old room, it was like rising from some underworld to the golden light of earth. I missed it so much. I couldn't wait to leave. Imagine Persephone loving Hades. Is it impossible? She could not even have escaped him by dying, after all. We often love the things that abduct us. I imagine I would find a way if I were bound to someone for the rest of my life, for half of eternity. It was Christmas or Thanksgiving. My mother, brother, and I joined hands around the table, the steaming food encircled by our arms. We squeezed each other's fingers, pressed our thumbs into each other's hands, that small triad who'd been so sad and strong and fiercely loving in my father's absence. After the dishes were washed, my mother sunk into the sofa and smiled at us. Should we play a game, she said, watch a movie? I need to borrow your car, I said. I can hardly bear to remember her expression, as if I'd crumpled her heart. Where could you possibly have to go tonight, she said. And I don't remember what I answered, only that she let me and how much it hurt to leave them. I pulled the front door shut behind me and something tore inside, like a chapped lip that rends at a word. Still, the quickening as I lit a cigarette in the dark and turned off of our road toward the highway. I imagine this is the way a man feels leaving his family for his mistress. I did feel part father, part husband, and maybe every daughter does, or just the ones whose fathers have gone. I didn't tell her when I got clean because she'd never known that I started using. She knew what she saw, and that was bad enough. You can't crawl up to your mother from hell and not look like it. If I told her why she didn't have to worry anymore, I'd have to confirm why she'd worried. I'd have to be done for good. What if Persephone told Demeter not only what happened in hell, but that she might be coming home for good? What daughter would do that? Besides, there was so much more to Hades than heroin. As the memories of stories are changed with each telling, they are more irrevocably changed with each conquest, each colonizer, each assimilation of one people into another. But there are older versions of Demeter's story, precursors to the Greek, that emerged from a system of matrifocal mythology and likely a society whose values it reflected. In it, there was no rape, no abduction. The mother, goddess of the cycle of life and death, moved freely from underworld to earth, receiving those who died as they passed from one to the next. Her daughter, some of these older versions say, was imbued with the same powers. Others suggest that she was simply the goddess of the underworld and had always been. It used to scare me that I wanted things that my mother couldn't understand. I think we both feared our difference. In hiding it from her, I often created exactly the thing I wished to avoid. It's not that I should have told her everything. That would have been its own kind of cruelty, though I could have trusted her more. The younger version of our story, the one I've carried for most of my life, the one I've mostly told here, is also true. I hurt myself and I hurt her over and over. But like the matrifocal myth, there's another version, a wiser one. In it, Persephone is already home. Her time spent in the dark is not an aberration of nature, but its enactment. I've come to see mine the same way. My darkness has become my work on this earth. I return to my mother again and again, and both realms are my home. There is no Hades, no abductor. There's only me. There's nothing down there that I haven't found a piece of in myself. And that's it for that one. Thank you. I'm just gonna look at my time. So I think I'm gonna read something new that is not published and won't be published for a very long time. But you know, as all of you who have written books know, and all of you who are writing books will eventually know, by the time you get to the point where I'm at with this new book, which is that it's been through copy edits, it's like going to print the advanced copy soon. I am so sick of it. Like, I have read through every word of it so many times. I want to look at anything else. And so it feels, you know, like working on something new feels like having a new crush. It's so exciting. Okay. I'm going to dedicate this. If you were all here in the same room with me, I would ask for a show of hands of anybody who's trying to quit something. Because this is about trying to quit something, but not any of the other things that I've already talked about trying to quit, something different. Okay, so this is called The Dry Season. And I'm probably going to stumble over it because I haven't read most of this aloud. And you should just know that it's set up, it's sort of formatted like a journal, like a log with days. So it reads a little bit disjointed, but there's some little dates and things like that I'm not going to read. So bear with me. Thank you for your patience. The Dry Season, summer 2016. You're going to have to acknowledge the ridiculousness of making such a big deal out of 3 months of no sex, my mother reminds me unnecessarily. There are people who, I tell her, I know that. Amy and I meet at the cafe on Bedford to work together. After a few hours of typing on our laptops at adjacent tables, we break for lunch. Over our exorbitantly priced grain bowls, I explained to her that I'm going to spend 90 days celibate. Amy has been single for 3 years. She finishes chewing her mouthful of greens and swallows. Oh, so you're going to give up sex for 3 whole months? She laughs richly like a villain in a children's cartoon and then concludes, fuck you. There are different kinds of celibacy. In the 13th through 16th centuries, the Beguines were religious orders of women in Northern Europe who lived in semi-monastic communes called béguinage, each with their own self-designated rules. They lived among the poor and worked in service. They were celibate and unmarried, but they took no vows, did not give up their property, and could leave the order at any time. They traveled, preached, and lived more freely than most any women in the world. For years, I had a glittery bumper sticker on my old car that said in voluptuous font, "Don't quit, surrender," one of the more sanctimonious 12-step slogans. My ex-girlfriend and I put it there for laughs, but over the years, my reading of it became increasingly earnest, especially after we broke up. Don't you think you should take a break? My mother asked me when I was 32. I had just ended a 3-year relationship. I had not been single since my first relationship at 15. I had been preoccupied with one person or another since I was about 11 years old. Probably, I said, though I had already begun the next relationship. Giving up a lover can sometimes be harder than giving up a drug, I found 2 years later. When I finally did, I thought, you should take a break. Then I got into another relationship, then another, then another, then another, then another. After each one, I thought, I should definitely take a break. The Beguines didn't quit sex. They quit lives that held men at the center. They gave up sex as the cost of that freedom. Surely it wasn't a sacrifice for some. To put God at the center of their lives required freedom from men. It meant putting themselves and each other at the center. Even some men who claim to put God at the center of their own lives want women to put men at the center of theirs. I have quit many things. When I was younger, I was always leaving. I never even told some jobs that I'd quit. I just stopped showing up and never walked down that street again. Once, I quit a boyfriend that way. This kind of quitting eventually shrunk my world to a thimble, though a thimble is still big enough to drink from. It seems unfair to call an addiction the attachment one has been encouraged in one's whole life, though what is unfair is not necessarily untrue. I could blame patriarchy for almost everything and be righteous, but at a certain point, the issue isn't whose fault it is, but how to get free. The male monks, unlike the Beguines, could not live among the poor or anyone and remain celibate. Even cloistered away in hair shirts, they took to raping female donkeys and molesting each other. For them, celibacy was a punishment, a great deprivation, a war with themselves. They had no freedom to gain, only freedom to lose. I suppose that is what world dominance will get you. Having nothing left to gain can be a vulnerable position, though not one for which I have much sympathy. My position is also not one for which all will have sympathy, not my friend Amy nor most of my exes. I have been thinking about my exes because I am making a comprehensive list of them to review during my celibacy. It is a sobering exercise. The list of my mistakes tedious in its repetition. I'm interested in making different mistakes. Barth wrote in The Lover's Discourse, throughout life, all of love's failures resemble one another, and with reason, they all proceed from the same flaw. In my case, I suspect it is more than one flaw, though if I can correct the one, it will be a happy miracle. The miracles of women are often more labor than magic, I've discovered. St. Catherine of Siena drank the pus of the dying and starved herself half to death for most of her life. Her rewards were exemption from marriage and the liberty to preach like a man. She mockingly referred to the Pope as daddy and scolded him publicly. By the time she starved herself to death, actually, she was one of Italy's leading ecclesiastical authorities and statesmen. Historically, at least, celibacy has often been the bedrock upon which our sovereignty is built. The thought occurs to me that I've actually been celibate for a few weeks before my official start date. I wonder if I can prorate that time and subtract it from my 90 days. I suspect that the last man I dated was the last man I will have ever dated in my lifetime, a title he may or may not appreciate holding. He was in town for the weekend, an old college friend. When I called another friend to complain about a bad date with a woman, she told me to call him. Call him, have him come fuck you, she said. It'll make you feel better. This was unlike me in every way. I have never enjoyed casual sex. How do they do it? The ones who make love without love, writes Sharon Olds. These are the true religious, the purists, the pros. Why not? I thought. I'll try something different. It was just okay, though I did feel better the next morning. After he went back to California, he started writing me letters. He wrote me a letter every day for the next 6 months. This is an aside, but now when I read that, it sounds really creepy, but it was not creepy at the time. While in a sanatorium for his tuberculosis, Barth fell in love with another patient. Though the man was straight, Barth wrote him letters every day for 6 months. I do not think that the letters convinced the man to love Barth, though the one sent by my old college friend did the trick. He was a very good writer of letters. That, combined with the 4,000 miles between us, was a powerful aphrodisiac. After we'd been dating for some months, the man asked me why I'd never introduced him to any of my friends. Are you ashamed to be dating a man? He asked me. Yes, I said. While we were together, I fantasized about having a baby almost constantly. I was 34. I'm fairly certain at this point that I won't ever have children. When I think about our sex, I think of it as the last gasp of my biological imperative. That man would have been a good father, I thought. But whenever we spent more than one day together, I couldn't wait to get away from him. His need for my attention emitted a very high-pitched whine, like a mosquito audible only to me. When I broke up with him, he told me I was making a colossal mistake. Sometimes I roll the phrase around in my mouth like a lozenge. I have to cover up Anne because her laughing is making me laugh. Sometimes I roll the phrase around in my mouth like a lozenge, a colossal mistake. Last summer, I intended to take that break. I had just broken up with the man, a colossal mistake, and I went to a residency in Vermont. I told my friends that I was planning on taking a sexual sabbatical. I brought a pair of ugly clogs to the residency as if they were prophylactic. For the first week, I wore the clogs to daily yoga classes. I woke up to work at 6 a.m. I walked in the woods and abstained from the freshly baked bread that they served at every meal. Then I began an affair with a sculptor. She was 25 years old. Such a thing would have been inconceivable at any earlier point in my life. I had exclusively dated people older than me. I was not dating the 25-year-old, I said, mostly to myself. Then I started eating the bread. Soon I was eating hardly anything but the bread, great slabs of it slathered in salted butter. I started smoking cigarettes with the 25-year-old and sleeping until 11. I did not finish my work, and I did not wear the clogs again. I think often about that particular definition of compulsion, an act meant to relieve a mental obsession. The book party is in Tribeca, and it is the kind that's held in a private apartment whose owner is unclear, though what is clear is that the owner is very rich. On the way there, my body hums with a summery kind of excitement. I associate summer in New York with smoking cigarettes, iced coffee, and sexual intrigue. The calorie pear trees, Pyrus caleriana, on my block smell like semen. And though I am not interested in semen, I associate it with the sexual roving of New York in the summer. Maybe one of the reasons, this is another aside, that I decided to read this is because I smelled that smell this morning on my run. So I looked it up for all of you. You no longer have to wonder what the semen trees are. It's the calorie pear. There is a well-known lesbian editor at the party, and when she begins talking to me, something starts to kindle. In my celibacy, it becomes increasingly clear when other people are on the make, when they're high on it. I have always been able to tell when someone is interested in me, but now I can tell whether I'm interested or not. I can tell from across a room. The Pyrus caleriana emits what is known as a volatile amine to attract pollinating insects, which apparently are compelled by the scent of ammonia, which is also found in semen. The editor does not smell like ammonia, but expensive cologne, and she is not across the room, but leaning on her elbow right next to me. Her gaze looks at me and through me at the same time. When I'm not hypnotized by the high of it, inside of it with them, it is so clearly impersonal. A person in that state of intrigue or ecstasis is no more in love with their subject than a wolf in love with a rabbit, a grouse with an acorn, a junkie with a musty taste at the back of her throat. Those habitually compelled by this ecstasis, a group among which I count myself, are almost robotic in their pursuit, like a sex Roomba. As an observer rather than a participant, I understand it is not a compliment to be pursued by a sex Roomba. The starkness of this fact disturbs me, as if I have suddenly recognized the smell of ammonia instead of heedlessly following it, as if I have been flirting with ghosts and zombies. They don't see me. They only see a source of what they hunger for. They are not inside the part of themselves where empathy resides. We have never been in this together. We have only each been alone in the same place with the same goal. And there's just a couple more short sections. The psychotherapist has written a very wise book with a very bad title. We meet for lunch at coffee shop in Union Square. When I arrive, she has already secured a booth. She is tiny, dressed in a drapey linen outfit and artistic jewelry. She epitomizes the type of therapist that I like, small, Jewish, bossy, and I like her immediately, though she says many things with which I disagree. You define yourself too much as an addict, she tells me. What is an addict but someone who's dealing with some unresolved element? What are any of us but that? I said. I think your hiatus is brilliant, she tells me, and that without it, you'll keep doing the exact same thing. I've begun to wonder if 3 months is long enough, I say. She laughs. Are you kidding me? Try starting with 6 months. She puts down her fork for emphasis. It has to be hard, she says. If it's not hard, you're not doing it. I don't agree, but I like her certainty. You know, Ulysses, she asks. I nod. You have to lash yourself to the mast, she says. It has to be that hard. I laugh at this. She's very dramatic. You know what I think is going to happen, she says. What? I ask. I think you're going to get depressed, she says. Really depressed. Possibly suicidal, she shrugs. Maybe not, but don't be surprised. It's over 90 degrees today. Waking alone is so far one of the principal pleasures of celibacy. I stretch my limbs out until I am eagle spread and then make sheet angels on the white cotton. There is no one to text who will be mad that I haven't responded. Sometimes I don't look at my phone for whole days. Now that it is mine alone, I am becoming something of a bed fetishist. I've replaced the pillows and ordered a new mattress. It arrives compressed in a box and when freed, swells like a sponge until it covers the floor. I take a shower and then lie on the new bed and masturbate in front of the air conditioner. Pythagoras is better known for his theorem, but he also founded a cultish school whose members were sworn, among other things, to secrecy, vegetarianism, and celibacy, but only in the hot, dry seasons of summer and fall. One shouldn't dry the body out, so winter, apparently, was safer for sex in its wetness. Conversely, early ascetics and doctors often believed that drying out the body was necessary for celibacy. Food that they deemed drying included many beans, vinegars, salted olives, and dried fruit. None of this has informed my own decision to be celibate, but as a secretive vegetarian whose diet consists largely of beans, vinegars, salted olives, and dried fruit, the parallels do please me. Let's say that there are 3 kinds of ecstasy, though of course there are many more. Physical ecstasy, as in an orgasm, mental ecstasy, as in the particular arrangement of brain chemicals that produce a high, and spiritual ecstasy, which is primarily the ecstasy of self-forgetting, a total engrossment and devotion to something other than the self. I would categorize the total self-forgetting that can sometimes result of both dancing and writing under spiritual ecstasy, as did Aristotle. Perfect joy excludes even the very feeling of joy, writes Simone Weil. For in the soul filled by the object, no corner is left for seeing eye. And I'll stop there. Thank you all so much for listening.
Melissa, how you made me laugh so hard.
Oh my God, it was such a pleasure. I wish I could just have a little box, a video of you laughing every time I give a reading. It would make me feel so much better.
The clogs. Oh, God, it was so great. And of course, the first essay, so devastating. And thank you so much. So Jen, how did we decide to do questions? I already forgot.
Yeah, no, I forget too. I'm gonna make everyone a panelist.
Okay.
So while I do that, you can start asking questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, and he would just throw it in the chat. Is that right?
There's
a Q&A box.
There's a Q&A, yeah. The
Cool.
chat, you should look at the chat because it's filled with how much I love you.
Oh my God, they never want you to stop.
Yeah, no, it's true. I know. We should have made you read for 40 minutes. It's so good.
Oh, good. Somebody got the sex Roomba. I was like, do people know what a Roomba is? Should I have explained that?
Oh no, it was great. Definitely. And hearing. So are they all panelists? I'm sorry for the technology.
No, so it takes a sec. Hold on.
Oh yeah, there's the sex room.
Do you guys have any questions? I'll answer anything.
Yeah.
They don't have to be like writerly questions. They can just be personal questions if you want.
I can ask you a question while we're waiting for people to pop in.
Okay, great.
I saw something you wrote on Twitter like a couple months ago about length, like about how whenever you try to write something short, it just winds up becoming longer.
It's a nightmare.
So tell us about your, like when you start out, do you imagine how long an essay is going to be, or, you know, because you primarily write essays for this book and the last one?
Yeah. Every time I start writing an essay, I think it's going to be about a fifth as long as it ends up being. Sometimes it's even worse than that. Like, the title essay of Abandon Me, my second book, I thought was going to be about 40 pages and it's about 135 pages. I recently wrote well, another atrocious example is there's an essay in my new book that I thought was going to be, again, about like 30 pages or something. And it's like 75, 80 pages. I mean, this is like not good advice. They're unpublishably long. Inevitably, what you have to do is then cut from that monolith an actual publishable essay. I mean, the online magazine called Long Reads prefers essays that are around 3,000 words. So like my short essays are like 9,000. I mean, it's really, I mean, I could write like a 2,000 word essay if I really, really try, but if I'm like really getting into it and it's like a thing I'm really interested in, it's really hard for me to keep it under 10. I need to work on it. You know, it's just like.
Interesting, Melissa. Melissa, you have so much, and many of the comments were like about the references to Greek mythology. I loved St. Catherine of Siena, one of my favorite. I make a pilgrimage tour ahead every other year.
She's amazing. Do you really?
Oh yeah, it's in Siena, obviously, but you put in a coin and it lights up and you see her like little dried apple doll face and the big nuns.
Oh my God. I'm going to try to apply for some grants so that somebody will pay me to go look at that. You can find like her fingernails and other parts of her, like in other parts of Italy. She's like scattered like breadcrumbs all over Europe.
But my question is, do you do research for each essay, or are you always reading about saints and Greek mythology and monks, and that's just sort of the stuff you like? How does it work?
If this were 10 years ago, I might actually lead you to believe that just in my own leisure reading, I'm reading about monks and saints and like ancient lost Greek mythologies, but I'm not. I'm reading literary mysteries, like police procedurals. I do a lot of research for all my essays. Yeah. I mean, and I am compelled by that stuff. Like I can't leave a used bookstore without some weird book about some like perverse saint, but no, I tend to it's like, I sort of do it together. Like I start an essay and I sort of sketch out my own ideas and do a brainstorm and some mapping and stuff like that. And then I go read a bunch of stuff like books and Wikipedia and academic articles and stuff like that. And then I start to do some writing and then I find some holes and I do a little more. And it's, I've learned to sort of let go of my economy, my belief in like the only useful productivity being word count, because I now spend so much time like reading and synthesizing and integrating things that I can no longer sort of measure my writing time by words typed.
Who's next?
We have let's see, Emily. It looked like you erased a question from Katie.
There's a question. Yeah.
Says, and then Brooks, you have your hand up, right? So
Katie
let's
says,
go back.
Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
There you go.
I'm sorry, you kind of blurred out for a minute. Did you mean Katie first or me?
You go, Brooks. You're there.
Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So on a surface level, we have very little in common because I've never even had a drink of alcohol, and I've only been with women and I wasn't with anyone until I was 20. But I related so hard to your writing, and I have a very kind of passionate, addictive personality, and I felt very viscerally. I could imagine myself in all of these situations, and it never felt voyeuristic. And that was very impressive to me. And it also felt like you were never talking down to the reader, which whenever I attempt to incorporate mythology, I love mythology, into my writing, I have a tendency to do. So my question is sort of dichotomous in that I just want your general tips on how to avoid sounding voyeuristic when talking about sexuality in writing, and how do you avoid talking down to readers when you talk about mythology?
Sure. I'll deal with those in reverse order. And I think the answer to the second one is that, I don't know, I wasn't really incorporating research when I was younger, but if I had tried to do it, it would have seemed pedantic and show-offy, because that's why I would have been doing it, to sort of be a pedant and show off, and because I was insecure, right? And now, the evolution of my work is such that research has really sort of intercepted my memoir writing, not because I thought it was a good idea, but because it's part of my thinking process. And the writing process is very, as much as it's sort of an aesthetic process, and for me, it's also a process of thinking on the page. And when I'm trying to figure something out, I just go to books. Like I look stuff up, and I find that really comforting. It's been that way since I was little. And so it was really, I guess, in the Essays of Abandon Me, I was sort of in the middle of a really engrossing, super intense, like kind of harrowing experience. And I just wanted to make sense of it, you know, and it felt really sort of archetypal. So I went to mythology and I read a bunch of Jung, and, you know, I was writing the story of that experience while I was living it. And so it was like the writing and the living were really all mixed up together. And those sources made their way into the work in a really sort of organic way. And so I think that that's the best way, is don't insert things, you know, like if you can read something and then just sort of integrate it into your own thoughts and work, go ahead and do that. Because otherwise it feels like you're trying to bring an element of like the academic paper or something to your work. Like it's never convincing unless it's really done from an authentic way, you know? And I also think just reading people who are really good at it, you know, just like read a ton of people who do it the way you want to do it, you know? And as for sort of the voyeuristic element, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that, because I don't know. I've never really thought of it that way, but I think maybe that's kind of the answer, is that when I'm writing about sex or things that other people see as kind of depraved, or like we shouldn't talk about that, I'm never thinking about what the outsider is going to think. And in fact, I very much sort of focus on the privacy of writing, and I very much feel alone when I'm writing my work, and that's the only way that I could say the things that I do, you know. I definitely do not get off on the idea of like shocking people or exposing myself. Like I was never even the kind of person who would get drunk and tell someone my whole life story. Like I'm very secretive. And I think that a lot of memoirists actually are, and it's because we are so secretive and so hidden that we have such a deep desire to sort of be known. And that's, you know, at least for me, that's part of what drives me to write about that stuff. But I think when I am doing it, it really, I think, boils down to the sense of risk. You know, it can't feel like a performance, you know, it really has to be real, right? Like I can't write about it and try to make it sound hot or like scary, or it can't be a manipulation, you know. For me, it really has to be, there has to be something there that I want to figure out. And so, which means that a lot of the time when I'm writing about sex or drugs, it's not sexy or cool or any of those things. It's kind of like sad and vulnerable and scary, and you kind of want to look away, you know, or it's like heartbreaking. So I think to really sort of focus on the parts of it that feel risky and exciting in that writerly way to you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Should I read Katie's question? Katie's question is, can you tell us a little bit about your writing life, daily practice, etc., and how it's evolved over your career? I always love hearing about this. I've never gotten sick of this question. It's always my favorite. And for me, you know, I don't write every day because I'm like have a job and a partner and I don't know. I mean, I know that there are people who do that, but that's not me. But I rarely will take more than a few days off. And if I take more than like a week or two off from writing, I start to just get really bitchy and depressed. And so it's sort of like this internal timer that starts to go off. And my daily practice is very much, I don't know, it's sort of scaffold on to whatever I'm working on. When I'm working on an essay, I just want to be working on it all the time, right? Because it's sort of like it's like starting a fire. I grew up in a house with a wood stove, and so it's like much easier to keep a fire going than it is to let it go out and start a new one. And so when I start an essay, I just want to be interacting with it until it's done, right? And to know I need to know what needs to happen next, and to not be working on it is like a small, silent kind of agony for me. So I'm a little bit compulsive when I'm really into something. And my process is very pretty circumscribed. It has changed over the years, but at any given year of my writing, I have a process that's really circumscribed and sort of detailed, and that I apply to most of the things I write. And right now, it used to be a very clear sort of outlining, and I would stick it on the wall, and then I would like start do draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, etc. Now it's a little different than that, because there's a lot of research involved. And I sort of start with kind of elaborate lists and notes, and that becomes a kind of outline. And then I move those pieces around, and eventually sort of the outline actually becomes the draft. And I usually have, I would say, no less than 5, often 10 or 15 other files and documents that are related to a piece, where I'm keeping stuff I cut, lists of ideas, little interviews, surveys I've given people, scraps of like research. So I have like a lot of documents sort of orbiting my draft. Yeah, and I've like, people have recommended Scrivener to me many times, but it's just like treating an abstract problem with an abstract solution doesn't work for me. I really am I'm so visual that I need to like draw little maps and have index cards. I'm just like a paper and scissors kind of person. And the last thing I'll say about my process is that I've learned through failure again and again how to protect my time. And so I block myself from my own internet. I turn my phone off and I put it in another room. And I told my partner I wouldn't be able to live with her unless I had a room of my own where I could close the door and work. Like, I don't think I could ever live with anyone without that. What do we have? Abigail. Abigail says, when writing new essays, how do you decide how much context to give to life details that have already been well documented in previous work? Do you assume that readers are familiar with the details of your life from previous works, or always write for an audience as if they're coming in blind? This is really hard. I still am figuring this out. And like, I'm sure there are other writers on here who have these issues when, generally, I have let go of the idea that I can't write about things once I've written about them, because that has been so disproven in my experience. And I also really think that one of the most valuable jobs of the memoirist and the personal essayist is to demonstrate publicly the manner in which we change our relationships to our own stories. And I think that's a really powerful example that we can give to other people, because we don't necessarily know that we're allowed to do that, So my relationship to, sex work, for instance, to having been a dom, has changed so dramatically over the years. And I've written about it in all of my books. I write about it again in my third book, Some, and it changes radically with each one. And that is like something I sort of loathe, because nobody wants to be like, oh, there she goes about spanking again. Nobody wants to be that girl, but actually sort of revisiting subjects that have been transformative for me has also been transformative for me, and it has really given me hope that that my relationship to anything can change, and that I'm allowed to change my mind, even when it's printed forever and eternity, one opinion, I can totally change my mind. And I think that that's really important for us to remember. I also don't assume that people are familiar, so I give sort of enough without giving the whole story, Anybody else?
There are a couple in the chat.
There are tons of questions in the chat.
Oh, hello. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna look at them and I'll pick the ones I like. Oh yeah, there's the practice. Privacy. Is the newer piece that you read part of a collection? It's part of a work in process. It's not a standalone piece. That's the book after this book that's about to come out. It was actually hilariously going to be an essay in the new book, Girlhood, which is coming out in March. The first essay is from Girlhood, and the second essay was supposed to be from Girlhood, but I started writing it and I just like crossed the 50-page mark, and it was like nowhere near anything close to finished. And I had started doing research, and I was reading about like the Beguines and Catherine of Siena, and I was like, it was hilarious. I was just walking around talking to people about like these saints drinking pus and wearing shirts of nettles, and like I was obsessed. And I thought, there's no way that I can fit this into this book. I'm already so far over deadline. And also I just want to read about this forever. So I was like, oh, I get it. And so I transplanted it and took it out of that book, and now it's growing into its own book. Okay, so Edgar wants to know about, oh no, this is from Katie M too. Abandon Me is described as memoirs rather than essays. So I wonder how you think about the differences between memoir and essay. And I will answer this sort of twofold. And one is that that subtitle was really the result of a tug of war between me and the marketing department, because I didn't want to have any subtitle. And if I had a subtitle, I wanted it to be essays, and they wanted it to be a memoir. And I was like, that's false advertising. So I suggested memoirs because it has the plurality of essays, and because they're so, inextricably linked, that I actually liked that. And it also sounded sort of romantic, like Colette would have called her memoirs, but I do think that the difference between memoir and essay, I mean, it sort of doesn't matter, right? But my understanding of it is that for me, the focus in a memoir is on the story, right? And it's very much like a memoir is, in many cases, almost interchangeable with fiction in terms of literary craft. And an essay can be a million trillion other things that I wouldn't describe as memoir, although it can also be something that could be described as a memoir. Some essays are like memoir, but other essays are much more like poetry or like philosophy. I think the essay is an incredibly capacious form. And I use it more often because I feel like there's often elements in my work that people looking for straightforward memoir would be like, why is this here? And I think that the word essay comes from the French verb essayer, to try. And for me, that goes back to that sort of the writing as a thought process. And in the essay, I'm usually trying to untangle something, and I don't necessarily know that there will be a resolution. There'll be a pivot of some kind, right, before you ever see it. But it doesn't sort of narratively close the way that I like a memoir to. Okay, I'm gonna move on. How do you know when an essay is done? I don't know. How do you know when an essay is done? Tell me if you know. I mean, I do. Sometimes I know, but and usually it's like when I get to that shift, right? When there's, I have been trying to untangle something and I got to another place. When I'm in a place that's different from where I started a lot of the time, right? And usually when I've gotten to an obscene word count and I just have to go back to the last change and stop it there, right? What are you currently reading is like the worst question, because I can never think of what I'm currently reading. Isn't it horrible? We all have that problem. I'm reading the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. And I had already read the 5th season years ago when it came out. And then my partner wanted to read it and she wanted to read it together. So I reread the 5th season, and now I'm in the Stone Sky, the 3rd one, because she's brilliant. And here we go. Yes, it's actually right here because I did his book launch a couple nights ago. This is a memoir called Lot 6 by David Ajmi, who's a brilliant playwright. It is, and I say this like, it's tricky because writers are always saying that their friends' books are like brilliant and they're geniuses and we adore them and they're perfect. And sometimes we just adore them and none of the rest of it is true. But this book really is brilliant. And it's just like, I won't tell you what it's about because that won't convey anything, but just like, I wanted to read every sentence of it aloud, and basically did to my partner really annoyingly. But it's hilarious and moving and deeply strange and hysterically wonderful. Lot 6. So I strongly recommend that. And I'm listening to a book about anti-racism called White Supremacy and Me and White Supremacy, which I'm reading with a group. And I'm also listening to Jessica Simpson's memoir. And I am also listening to that book about the Golden State Killer, which I'm going to abandon because it's way too scary, giving me a nightmare. So turns out I do know what I'm reading. All right, I'm going to do just a few more of these because I feel like I've been talking for a long time. let's see. What do you do with all your drafts and notes and research materials after a piece is complete? I used to just throw them all away, but now I've started saving them, or parts of them. Like I recycled the articles and stuff like that after it's fact checked. If it's published, I save them. If it's unpublished, I save it all in case it gets fact checked. Hardly anywhere does that anymore, but sometimes they do. And yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just in the computer, so it gets saved. Okay, and I will, maybe this will be the last question. What reactions has your mother had to some of what you've written about your relationship? You know, my mother deserves an award for reading everything I've ever written and for still loving me. Because I have like ravaged the bones of like everything that, could ever be uncomfortable for her to read about. I truly have. And you know, what's funny is that in writing that essay, Thesmophoria, an editor reached out to me and asked me to write that for an anthology initially. And she said, it's about mothers. And I was like, you know, I really sort of like put my mother through it with my writing. So I'm just going to write something really sweet, and it's going to be like a Valentine's card for my mom, you know what I mean? But like try to sit down and write an essay that's only nice thing. Like that's the most boring essay. Nobody wants to write that essay. And so of course I was like, oh, let's put the smoking meth in there, and then let's put the blah blah blah. And it actually ended up being a list of the things that my mother and I like were very, very, very close. And I was like, but what are the things that we actually won't talk about? And then I went and wrote an essay about the things we actually don't talk about, which ended up initiating this process that we've been through many times, which is that I write about something that we haven't talked about, and then it forces the conversation, which is excruciating. And then at the end of it, we love each other even more, which is a lot about our relationship. I'm very, very fortunate. She is a therapist and she's been in a lot of therapy. So she has like a really big toolbox for dealing with this kind of stuff. But in many ways, like that's one of the great services of writing in my life. And one of the reasons why I don't think I'll ever stop doing it, even if I stopped publishing, is that it is a mechanism that makes it possible for me to confront things that I never otherwise would. And that my relationships, or the depth of my relationships, depends upon, you know, like my relationships with my family and my friends and my partner are incredibly intimate and deep and honest. And I wouldn't be capable of them if I weren't the kind of writer that I am, because my instinct is like very avoidant, conflict phobic. I just want to be like checked out on drugs, like kissing strangers, you know? So that I have a life that looks nothing like that is like at least 70% due to writing.
Melissa, you have been amazing as always. I just love talking. The time went so quickly, and everybody's hanging on your every word. They were two incredible essays, devastating, as you always are. Thank you for being here with us in the middle of moving, right? I mean,
it's such a treat to take a break from packing and like put some earrings on. It was really, really nice.
And tomorrow we're going to see you again, I think at 4. Yeah. I don't want to mess up the time, but
yeah, it's at 4.
Craft Talk, which we'll be looking forward to. So you have like almost 24 hours more to pack more.
Great.
And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We'll see you tomorrow.
Oh, thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.